Hi, my name is Pamela Fuselli, and I'm the host of Popping the Bubble Wrap. Are you the person in your family who worries about the safety of others, about buying safety products and using them? Are you yelling, "Yes, that's me"? Then this is the podcast for you. Raising a child or children can be a hair-raising undertaking, and keeping them safe is your priority. Parachute's Popping the Bubble Wrap podcast explores what you really need to think about and provides easy tips on prevention strategies. No bubble wrap here, though. So, you've kept your little one rear-facing for as long as possible, and it's time to move forward to a forward-facing car seat. Deep breath, you've done this once already, choosing the right car seat for your vehicle and for your child. On this episode, we're tackling the forward-facing car seat. When is your child ready to turn forward-facing? Are there any special considerations you need to be aware of when it comes to forward-facing car seats? And how do you use it correctly? For example, can your child wear a snowsuit in a forward-facing car seat? Today, everything you need to know about selecting and installing using a forward-facing car seat. Joining me today for the conversation is parent Erin McDonald and our expert Holly Choi, Vice President of the Child Passenger Safety Association of Canada. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So, Erin, you have a 6.5-year-old and an almost 9-year-old. You're kind of on opposite ends of the forward-facing car seat stage. Is your youngest itching to get out of their forward-facing car seat yet?
Not yet, but she is noticing that a lot of her peers are already out of a car seat and are in a booster.
Okay.
So she has questions.
When can I, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And for the fit for your child, she's obviously still meeting the manufacturer's recommendations for a forward-facing car seat.
She is, and I actually measured her again today. She's riding forward-facing in a Clec Flow, and she has several inches to go before she maxes out those limits. And in terms of weight, she is only about 34 pounds. So she is nowhere near booster ready for the weight. So she may or may not outgrow by length before she outgrows by weight. So we'll be looking at probably another option for forward facing in a harness before we move to booster.
Before you move to booster. What was the experience with your older child? Did she fit differently in the forward-facing car seat?
It was very similar.
Okay.
So there's only 2.5 years between them, but we got to 7.5 before the eldest was big enough consistently to stay in a booster. So she wasn't staying above 40 pounds. She would go a little bit over 40 pounds and then she would get a bad cold or something and lose her appetite for a few days and then she'd be below. So we had to keep her in a harness until she was consistently above 40 pounds. And when she was at 43, I was going to be more comfortable at 45. But when she was consistently 43, I was like, we'll try it. We can always put you back in the harness if we have to. And she never went back down. So it was a very, very similar thing. So at least her little sister knows that it's probably going to be a little bit.
Right. She has her big sister to let her know what the experience was.
Exactly.
Did you find buying the forward-facing car seat any easier than the rear-facing?
No, because I bought a combination seat. So I bought one that I felt would have high rear-facing limits because I don't know if I was ambitious and I thought my children might have a really great growth curve, but they don't. So I wanted one that in Canada would rear-face to the highest limits at the time, I thought. And I chose it based on our needs. We had a lot of car sickness, so we were going based on maybe if the seat was a little bit higher anecdotally, would that help with car sickness? I like to think it did just because I purchased the seat, so I don't actually know. But those were the choices that came into it. We wanted extended rear facing, and it turned out that the littlest one almost could still be. She just passed those limits for rear facing, and it was only since school let out. Oh, hi, Holly, you're waving.
Yeah, Holly, you're laughing and smiling. So yeah, you want to weigh in here on this?
I just wanted to add, because car seats can get super jargony very, very quickly. In case anyone's wondering what a combination seat is compared to something like a convertible car seat. A convertible car seat is what most people will start the forward-facing stage with, and that is a seat that rear faces and then turns around to a forward-facing seat. Combination car seats are often referred to as harness to booster car seats. It's the same thing, and it's the idea that it's only going to forward face. So first as a harnessed forward facing seat, and then you will detach the harness in some capacity, tuck it away, whatever that car seat does, and use it as a booster seat. So combination harness to booster, it's another option that you can use in lieu of a convertible if you're going to go to a forward-facing mode.
There's a lot of choices out there. And before you have your child, or even when you have your child, as you mentioned, Erin, like you don't know exactly how fast they're going to grow or in which ways they're going to grow and what they'll need. So it's kind of hard sometimes to try to pick the best car seat. And I think parents also, and Holly, you can attest to this probably with all of the parents you've talked to, they'd love to buy one that lasts the entire time because they can be expensive. There are different kinds of these, combination car seats or convertible car seats. And it's great to know the difference between those.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important to note is that each child is really going to be so different, and it's easy to fall back on that with any topic we talk about, to be honest. But with car seats, I think it is especially important to recognize that not all car seats will work for all children. Not all car seats will work for all vehicles. There are so many factors at play. But when you're looking at a seat, I try to avoid thinking about it like I'm amortizing the years across multiple modes by getting something that does everything. Because for that child, you may not be within the limits of that mode when you end up needing it for that particular car seat. So it can be really hit or miss whether an all-in-one car seat is going to do that job at the right time and correctly for a certain child. That doesn't mean they're bad car seats. They can be excellent car seats, and I've owned them for my own children. But you do have to be aware of that. So if you're weighing that booster mode into your purchasing decision, you may find that it doesn't end up working for you later. So just take some comfort in the fact that booster mode tends to be the least expensive of all of the car seats out there. So worst case scenario, you can find a booster that will be inexpensive, that will fit your child well down the road.
Yeah, I think that's really important for parents to hear, is that, they're not alone. Lots of people go through this and they try to, you can see the value in that amortization. As you said, if I can only buy one that would work for everything, what would that be? But knowing that, you may, I think going in just knowing, okay, if you're going to do that, you may end up having to change it anyway based on, your child and the fit. And Erin, it sounds like your kids are quite mature and grown up in accepting the fact that they are still in forward-facing car seat and or a booster seat when their friends aren't.
I would like to think that they're mature about it. They
well, some days.
have. Yeah, what they do is they just really question, why is it this way for me and it's not this way for my classmates? And that's not I'm not going to explain my judgments or judge their parents for their decisions, but it's just like, this is what keeps you safe in my car. And we leave it at that, like my car, my child, my rule sort of thing. And that works for them right now. They haven't pushed back too much.
But it's a component of car seats that we don't always talk about. Like we talk about the fit of the child in the car and the seat in the car, but not that sort of social, developmental, relationship-based kind of component of a car seat. Holly, there's some common mistakes I know that parents will make, inadvertently when they're buying or installing and using their car seats. What are some of the top, say, 3 things that parents should be paying attention to?
Oh gosh. Well, with forward-facing car seats, I think one of the biggest things is really the harnessing. And that's probably because it looks very similar to harnessing a rear-facing child. You still have the same buckles, you still have the same chest clip, and all of that kind of fits the same. But there are a few things that are going to look different when a child's forward-facing, and the most notable one is the height of those harness straps above the shoulders. When a child's rear-facing, we like to say that the harness should look kind of like a backpack. It should either be flat with the shoulders or dip behind and look like they're kind of carrying their car seat on their back. But with forward-facing, we actually want that harness to be above their shoulder. So the way I like to describe it to caregivers is, imagine when you're driving a vehicle and you've got your seatbelt on. Your seatbelt likely floats a bit up above your shoulder. And we're looking for that same kind of look of it coming above the shoulder rather than below when they are facing the same direction as us. And that's super, super important for injury prevention reasons, notably being that it helps to stop that child from being able to go too far forward in a crash. And that can reduce the risk and the severity of any head, neck, or spine injuries that a child could get in a crash. But where that goes sideways, where this goes sideways for a lot of people, and Erin, I'm not sure what car seats your kids have been in, but there are two types of harnesses that you can get in a car seat on the market currently. One would be a no rethread harness, and there's usually a handle that you squeeze, and you can adjust the height of the harness position up or down really easily just by squeezing this handle and moving the harness, the entire harness, up or down. The other is a threaded harness, and that's where you've got slots in that seat back of the car seat on the shell, and you have to actually take the straps and move them into different slots manually. When you have a seat that's installed forward-facing, you can probably imagine that adjustment needs to happen behind that seat. And if that seat's already installed, a lot of caregivers go, I'm going to have to uninstall this car seat to be able to change the straps. And then their child is growing, and that just looks really daunting for them. Maybe they had a really hard time getting that in. So I do want to emphasize that positioning is super important for safety. But as always, I will always come back to the same message. If you have any kind of struggle with a car seat, the greatest gift you can give yourself is visiting a CPST, a child passenger safety technician, and get some hands-on help. We have so many people mobilized across Canada that are excited to help you with your car seat. So please make use of them.
That's great information. And we'll have contact information in our show notes as well for people to be able to go and access that information. There is one difference in Canada that is a mandatory requirement that we need on our forward-facing car seats that in the US is optional, right?
Yes, this is another very common mistake. The top tether. So if you're looking at the shell of a car seat, we've got all the straps on the front, and you might be familiar with the lower anchor connectors, which hook onto those bars in our vehicle seats. However, there is a top tether that will come out the top of the back of the car seat, and that strap typically goes somewhere in your trunk or your hatch or around that area. And that is legally required for car seats that are forward-facing in Canada. Meaning, if you are using a car seat in Canada in your Canadian plated vehicle, and that is a Canadian seat, you have to have it tethered. It is not optional when you're forward-facing. And that can also greatly reduce the chance of severe injuries. What we're looking for in forward-facing children, I mentioned that we're trying to prevent them from coming forward too much. But in a crash, that's what their body's going to do. They're going to naturally come forward. So first we want that harness to stop them. But if their seat keeps going, then they're still going to move forward. So what the top tether does, that strap that goes over the back, that is going to reduce the way that the car seat can move forward in a crash, which has been shown to reduce the amount the child's head, just their head alone, will move forward by up to 4 to 6 inches. So If you think of like a sandwich, okay, like a Subway sandwich, that's how much your child's head could move forward without that tether installed. So it really helps to keep them back, to keep those crash forces off of their body as much as possible. So while it's required here, it is still common because a lot of people don't realize that, but it can really help. And that's why it's a legal requirement for our car seats that are forward facing in Canada.
Yeah, it's a good explanation of that tether strap and what those anchors are in the cars that they attach to. And then Erin, you talked about, keeping your children in the car seats as long as possible. So I think that's probably the third thing that's most commonly done is people move their kids too early, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think as a parent myself, you're always excited about milestones and seeing your kids move on to the next thing. And it's a little bittersweet sometimes, but with car seats, you really want to try to stay in that mode that they are still within the limits of for as long as you can. It can be a bit of a downgrade in safety in some ways when you move too fast to the next stage. And especially from rear facing to forward facing, we see a lot of the crash forces now being more on the child's body rather than on the shell of the car seat. So we want to make sure before a child's forward facing that child has the bone density, their body is physically large enough and matured enough to withstand some of those crash forces. And then coming out of that forward facing mode, yes, they're going into a booster seat, but the thing that's really keeping them safe at that point is the seatbelt. All the booster's doing is making sure that the seatbelt is positioned properly. But if a child's not sitting correctly and now the seatbelt's not in position, that's a lot of responsibility to put on a child. So we have to make sure that kids are physically mature enough to be in that next stage that they're going into, but also that they understand the responsibility of going into that next stage and that they are prepared to make use of that.
Yeah, very good points. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to do some question and answer. So we're going to talk about, Erin, some questions that you have. I have a couple of questions for Holly, and we'll get some answers to, I think, some of the burning questions that parents have. So back in a moment. Nearly 3 decades ago, Amazon set out to be Earth's most customer-centric company, where people can discover and purchase the widest possible selection of safe and authentic goods. As part of that mission, they obsess over earning and maintaining trust by ensuring that they provide a trustworthy shopping experience. Amazon is dedicated to helping you make informed choices and use your purchases safely. Visit www.amazon.ca/product safety and usage and explore expert tips, articles, and videos from our partners to ensure a secure shopping experience. So before the break, we were talking about all of the information that parents need to know about forward-facing car seats and installing it correctly. So Erin, this is an opportunity to ask Holly some questions. What do you want to know about forward-facing car seats? So start with your first question.
Thank you. Thank you, Holly. Could you speak to the importance of paying attention to which belt path you're using when you're switching it from the rear facing to the forward facing? My seats have stickers on them, but I have more than one type of seat depending on what vehicle they're in, and not all of the information is equally displayed in my opinion. But could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and it can be very drastic from one car seat to the other, what kind of information you're going to see there. There's some that's mandated, but some car seats are a little more helpful with their labels than others, for sure. So let's first define a belt path. So a belt path is basically, if imagine you're installing with a seatbelt, where would you be putting the seatbelt through the car seat when you're installing? That is the path of the seatbelt. It is what we call the belt path. So that's standardized language. You'll see that in car seat manuals. And it means that when you are rear facing and you're forward facing, you are very likely going to be using 2 different belt paths. Typically, the belt path, or that hole that you're going to put that seatbelt through when you're installing, is most likely to be closest to the vehicle seat back that car seat's sitting on. So a common error that we'll see sometimes with those installs forward facing is that we'll still see a seat belt or even the lower anchor connector strap woven through the rear facing belt path, which would now be, imagine if you're sitting on a vehicle seat, all the way over by where your knees would be instead of being closer to the vehicle seat back side of that seat, right? So having it as in the correct belt path means a few things. One, you're most likely going to get the best install that way, period. But additionally, car seats are designed to save lives, and car seats will only do that when they're used correctly. But used correctly means that we are basically replicating when that manufacturer did all of their crash testing. That's how that seat was installed. So we know the seat will perform when we install it per those instructions. So I'm a total visual, hands-on learner, and some people might be listening to this going, what are you talking about? I can't picture this in my head. Totally fair. Open up a car seat manual for a convertible or all-in-one or even a combination car seat, and you'll see the word belt path. There's typically a diagram within the first 15 or so pages of a car seat user manual that points at all the different parts of the car seat and tells you by name what they are. Make sure that when you're forward facing, you're using the belt path that is designed for forward facing. Because yes, that is a very, very common mistake for installs.
Thanks, Erin. That was a good question. We often get inquiries, or I talk to friends and they have incredulous looks on their faces when I say that they should not put their child in a snowsuit in a car seat, whether forward facing or rear facing. Can you talk to us about why that is, Holly?
Yes. Now, full disclosure, I'm from Vancouver, so we don't know what snow is, but I know that this is a problem for most of Canada. So the issue with not just snowsuits, but really any bulky clothing. So this would include winter jackets, but also hockey gear, I'm sorry to say, things that are going to be puffy in the car seat underneath the harness straps or even underneath the seatbelt for a child in a booster or an adult in a vehicle seat, just to be clear. They can increase the risk of a child being ejected in a crash. Now, you might think, okay, what if I've got a child and they're in this snowsuit and I'm really pulling on that harness strap and I feel like they can barely breathe. I've tightened them so tight. It might feel like they're not going to move. But a really interesting test you can do that will mimic what would happen in a crash. Put the child into that item of clothing, whether it be a snowsuit, a thick winter coat, whatever you think you're going to test out in the car seat. Harness them up. Tighten them up as you would if you were about to drive, okay? Then you're going to unbuckle them without loosening it at all. So it's holding that setting where you had tightened it all the way with all of that gear on. Then you're going to put them back in what I like to call regular clothing. So that might be like a light sweater, some, a regular, what would you wear in the month of May? Okay. That's what I usually say to people. Just a nice little spring outfit. And you may be shocked to find that sometimes there's even as much as 4 inches of slack added to the harness. And the reason that that's a big deal, because a lot of people will still say, okay, but I mean, it was tight with the snowsuit. In a crash, you're not dealing with the force of what your arms can pull out of a harness. You are now dealing with G-forces. And in a crash, the crash forces on that child, on the car seat, on their body, they can compress those fabrics down to basically all of the airs out of them at this point, paper thin. And now all of that slack is in the harness, which means it's not tight to the child, which means the child can move. So it seems like, I totally understand why people think, well, but they really feel like they're tight in there.
Right.
It's one of those things that's not worth the risk.
Right.
So you've got other options. You can put a blanket over top of the harness once they've already been tightened, put a toque on them. If you can preheat your vehicle before you get in. And some kids even will just, once they're harnessed, put their coat on backwards with their arms through, the way that we used to wear our coats when we were joking around as kids. They do make car seat safe coats. That is its own market. They can get quite pricey, but there are other options out there.
Okay.
And think about fabrics, wool, polar fleece, a lot of things that can really help to keep that heat in. Because again, I'm from Vancouver, we can get away. We have a one season wardrobe, but I understand that that's not everyone's lived experience.
Yes, that's so true. We have time for one more question. So Erin, go ahead.
Okay, Holly, if you don't mind me asking, this one is a comfort question because my 6.5-year-old she's getting vocal and she thinks she's grown up. She sometimes complains about her legs aching. She never complained when she was rear facing, but if the drive is a little bit longer, the position with her legs dangling hurts. Is there something that's safe that we can do that can make her more comfortable in the car?
Oh, that's a good question. Very good question. So the concern would be that we don't want to add anything heavy to the back seat, especially anything that could be sharp, that could, in a crash, move around the vehicle cabin, right? We don't want anything that could fly around and hurt someone in a crash. But as someone that is 5'1", if you have ever sat on a bar stool and you did not have anywhere to put your legs, I mean, really, you don't have to be 5'1" to know this.
Totally
after a while,
with you.
You start to get really, really uncomfortable. Your legs start falling asleep. You're squirming around looking for something to put your feet on. So I know this well, and it's one of the reasons that a lot of children do like to stay rear facing for longer because they can just cross their legs. But once they're turned around and they're outgrown that rear facing mode, this is a very real problem. Look for something lightweight. Sometimes having something just like one of those foam yoga blocks can be helpful, but you really want something that is going to be lightweight. And some of us will refer to something we call the ouch test, which is if you hit yourself in the head with that object, does it hurt? If you're not willing to hit yourself in the head with that object, it probably shouldn't be floating around in your back seat. So you would really want something that is lightweight, soft, not sharp, that would not cause injury in a crash. So it's a hard one. There are some car seats now that come out with foot support or calf support for forward-facing children. But definitely one of those reasons for anyone that's looking to move forward-facing that you may want to consider keeping them rear-facing longer. They're a lot more comfortable while they have their legs crossed.
And when they're comfortable, they will be happier to stay in that seat longer.
In theory.
I totally relate to that. Well, Erin and Holly, the time has flown by. I really appreciate the time you took to come on the podcast to share the information, Erin, to ask your questions and share your experience, because you've got sort of bookends in your family right now on forward-facing car seats. So thanks for coming on today on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Popping the Bubble Wrap is a podcast of Parachute, Canada's national injury prevention charity. We release episodes monthly. Visit us at parachute.ca and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Parachute Canada. Don't keep us a secret, though. Help other parents find this podcast by sharing the link to Popping the Bubble Wrap and taking a second to submit a review. It really does help. Popping the Bubble Wrap is produced by Story Studio Network.